Thank you, Kelly. Kia ora, everybody. We now, as Kelly was saying, we now move into the first substantive session, or thematic session, which is, as James Shaw, our new co-leader, and many others have said, is quite simply the biggest challenge ever to confront humanity. And it is what unites us together. And there are many other issues. But this one, if we don't solve this one, and if we don't solve it very quickly, the rest will not be solved either. So that is the, you might say, the almost philosophical background with which we are here together. And have been working as an international community for the last 25 years, and in fact as a green party in New Zealand for 25 years as well. What we thought we'd do is just set the scene with what might be just called an appetizer. I think it's only 4 slides, PowerPoint, 4 slides. I think there's a hard copy that can be distributed maybe at the back for you to look at, but it's not, you might say, massively deep. It's just, in a way, stating the obvious. But it sets up, I think, the discussion for the panel over the next hour or so. So what we're going to do is take a snapshot of the Asia-Pacific region alone when it comes to climate change. We're going to have a look at simply some statistics. And then at the very end, on the 4th slide I think, have a look at the broader political diplomatic context in which this is now playing out. So you will see from the very first one very striking thing. It's Asia. Those are the gross emissions in total per year from 1990 to, is it 2012? 2010. And if you look at the regional trends, you will see at the bottom, Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Island countries, just going along pretty much flat. As it happens, New Zealand and Australia have increased. New Zealand has increased. Oh, this is the moment for me to apologise to you for New Zealand. New Zealand's gross emissions have increased massively, our net emissions even more. But setting that aside, we're sufficiently small that it's, along with Australia and the island countries, it is still pretty much a flat line through the time period. Europe, leading the world, they fight over climate policy, but they lead the world, and we need to emulate them. They have reduced their gross emissions over this 20-year period. North America has increased, but slightly. Latin America and Africa, pretty much similar. And then look at Asia. This is because of 2 things. One, the numbers game. Population and increasing economic activity per capita. This does not mean that Asia should carry guilt, because when we look at the per capita, and we will in a minute, we will realise that Asia has every right to develop itself, whereas Europe, North America and Australia and New Zealand within Oceania have the obligation to reduce when it comes to per capita. But in absolute numbers, it tells a massive story. Because when we look at 1990, call it year 1 or year 0 of our climate, Asia was less than Europe in gross terms. And then we just, and it's not on the screen, we think about historical emissions, pre-industrial, 1750 to 1990 if you like, 77% from the north. That is rapidly changing, even in historical terms. But that is the first major message that we need to internalize, this massive increase in Asia, which basically means that the extent to which climate change in absolute terms is solved in the course of the negotiations and in the course of development of national policy, it will be in Asia, especially. Asia Pacific, but especially Asia. So that's the emissions. Now for the risk and the impact. That's the, I think it's WI. I'm pretty sure that's World Resources Institute. Or no, it's another source. Assessing the climate risk for countries. The top 10. 6 out of the top 10 are in Asia. Numbers 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. Leading with the Philippines. And we all know, and we all have felt the agony of the Philippines. I think it was Doha, 2013, 2012, when Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines. Yeb Sano's extraordinarily dignified and emotional appeal inside the UN conference. I was there for that, and I met him just afterwards. And his combination of emotionality, commitment, and dignity is pretty much without peer. We need global climate leaders. He is one. So the Philippines is getting it, but not just the Philippines. We look at the other countries as well. And of course, on top of that are the low-lying island states, especially in the Pacific, Indian Ocean particularly. And we all know the existential threat that obtains for them as well. So that's the impact. So not only is Asia Pacific the major player henceforth in the emissions challenge, but it is also the major, you might say, recipient of the risk and impact. This puts it in a different context. I mean, there's a lot of stats there. The one that counts for the purpose of this slide is the per capita, which is third from right. And we look at the top, what we've done here is in red, list the top 5. That's within Asia Pacific. And then in the green are the other countries within our federation that are not listed in the top 5 or the bottom 5. And then at the very bottom in the blue are you might say, the bottom 5 when it comes to per capita emissions. And that tells a story in itself. Brunei, new A because of a very small population. Australia, Bahrain, and Mongolia. Then New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, China, which has now come to 7.9 emissions per capita, tonnes per person per year. Solomons, India, Pakistan, Nepal, and look at the ones at the bottom. They're small, low-lying island states. So it becomes complicated. When you're at the UN negotiating this stuff, or you're a national political leader trying to get the policy right, there is such a mix of your absolute role in terms of gross emissions, the moral or equity principle under the Framework Convention, in terms of your obligation either to cut because of your historical emissions and your capacity to develop effective policy, and the recognition, as Kelly was saying, between what you could call the legitimate national interest and the binding global interest in reducing emissions. This is an imperative. The difference between the last 10,000 years and the last 25 years, and the difference between most of the international community and the Green parties around the world, the one qualitative difference is that the latter recognise accurately that we are in a global crisis. If you're in a global crisis, as Naomi Klein says, this changes everything. If you are not, then it's item 11B on the agenda on Monday morning. And we'll just do more of the same. Or we'll tinker at the margin. We'll do better. We'll solve it wrong. That's the difference. And it shows up in all of this. So what does this mean as we head off to Paris? It means this. that there are two major things going on. One is the still increasing emissions and the need for global emissions to peak, the scientists will tell us, for 2 degrees within the next 5 years, which is an extraordinary challenge. And the other is the evolution in the political diplomatic relationships that's going on, more or less explicitly recognised in the negotiations themselves since 1990. At the beginning, in 92, with the Framework Convention, the goal was to stabilise emissions, basically avoid dangerous climate change. But Article 4.2a did impose a general obligation on the developed countries to take the lead and, quote, return emissions to earlier levels, which meant 1990, by the end of the decade, which meant the year 2000. So we had a loose commitment to return to 1990 by 2000. Every one of us failed, pretty much. Kyoto, child of the Framework Convention, gave for the first time binding obligations to cut on the north, the developed rich countries. 5.2% off 1990 collectively, by and large, net, with the singular exception of Canada, which withdrew at the last minute. But you can see that Kyoto maintained the distinction between developed and developing through the 1990s and into the first commitment period of 2008 to 12. There was meant to be, always meant to be, another agreement, global agreement, which would either be a twin or a child of the Framework Convention, which would transform that 1992 approach into a genuine global agreement where everybody, all countries, 194 states parties, took binding obligations of whatever kind. That was meant to have been finished from the Bali Action Plan 2007 to 9. It was meant to have concluded at Copenhagen in 09. We were meant to have a global agreement to follow CP1 in 2013. The biggest political diplomatic failure, arguably, ever. How many among us here were at Rio in 92? Hands? 1, 2. How many were at Kyoto? Anyone? 1. How many were at Copenhagen? A few, 5 or 6. How many are planning to be at Paris? I'm just saying. You can see the failure of Copenhagen in 2009 was arguably the most searing experience we have had in trying to get our global policy together to stave off the challenge. What is happening now is the negotiations picking up where we broke down in 2009, another 6 years lost, and trying to get to a point where we have a global legal agreement that won't take effect until 2020, that depends on voluntary commitments, INDCs, voluntary contributions. Voluntary contributions. We're going to solve this through 194 voluntary contributions. We've got to get our act together. It's a long way to go. But what you do see is an evolution from the bifurcation between North and South, rich and poor, developed, developing, into a much more inclusive and coherent self-perception that as a global community, we have to get this together. Whatever the contributions and hopefully commitments in due course negotiated among ourselves equals the global carbon budget divided up, if you like, according to the principle of equity in the Framework Convention. It is one massive challenge.